record and right now. Hi, so I'm Jen McKenzie, K-12 district teacher librarian, and also a graduate student for Antioch.
And I am Kevin Debs. I am a professor of parent education at North Seattle College and also a doctoral student here at Antioch.
Yeah, and we're having a conversation about our leadership philosophy. I have some slides I'm going to share on our assignment portal, and then I'm also going to be typing up an updated teacher leader statement just for my website as well. So we're kind of like providing multiple little pieces for this assignment in a creative manner. And if you see me looking over to the side, I'm kind of referring to my slides, but I was going to go first about a little bit about myself as a leader, and then Khav was going to take a turn. And when I'm thinking about my life and being a leader, the three main things that pop out to me are my military career, being a teacher leader, and then now as a teacher librarian, being a leader for our library community in the state of Oregon. And I did think of some quotes that I literally live by. So the very first quote that I love, that I live by, that I literally have hanging outside of my office door is, "We rise by lifting others." And that's by Robert Ingersoll. And that's just how I've always viewed leadership. Like, it is my job, if I'm put into a leadership position, to be at the base and literally do everything possible to uplift everyone I'm working with and uplift the mission and move things forward. But I always see myself down here, right? And when I think of my military career, that's definitely how I led soldiers. I was in the Army for 12 years. I was a medical service corps officer. I did international missions. I worked at Walter Reed Army Medical Center. Some really intense leadership. I always say it's the most holistic leadership I've ever participated in, because when you're in charge of a group of soldiers, you're not only in charge of the soldiers and your hospital and the mission, but you're in charge of every type of health, like financial health. If you're on active duty and a soldier's not paying their bills, guess who they call? The commander, right? You're also in charge of people's physical fitness and mental wellness. It's very holistic. And one of the most unique things about leadership in the military is that it's very unique because you're literally responsible to protect your fellow soldiers with your life. Like, literally, you have to have such strong bonds formed with your team that you would be willing to give up your life for someone in battle, which is just wild to think about. And I feel like that's how I first really became a leader, because I joined the military when I was 18 years old, straight out of high school. And that kind of set me down the path of leadership. And then when I pop into becoming a teacher, I was an Army reservist. So I was in the Army at the same time I went to school and became a reserve and, a teacher. And next year marks my 20th year as a teacher. And I've taught at the college level, middle school level, high school. Now I'm K-12, working with kindergartners. It's a blessing. I love it. And we had a conversation about, for one of our former assignments, I used to call myself a servant leader, but that terminology just became problematic. I love, in one of our conversations, we were kind of exploring adaptive leadership more. And I feel like maybe that is my new, I want to explore adaptive leadership more, because I think it kind of speaks to my heart. And then one thing I'm really proud of throughout my entire teaching career, I've been very well respected as a leader. And I've always had, I've had a couple of people call me a stone catcher. I don't know if you're familiar with that terminology, stone catcher, but Brian, what was his name? Stevenson wrote the novel Just Mercy. And it was about his job, protecting and defending inmates who were wrongfully accused, who were on death row. And it's just who I am as a human being. In whatever environment I'm in, I always zero in on the people who might be part of a marginalized community or might need uplifting and support. And that's just who I am. I feel like it's my job on this planet, again, to like uplift others. And I take that as like, that's like the biggest compliment I've ever received in my entire career, was being called a stone catcher, because I think that's a pretty special thing. And then my last main chunk of like where I am living right now is I'm our president-elect for our Oregon Association of School Libraries for the state of Oregon. And honestly, leadership in library land is the most challenging form of leadership I've ever done, even more than the military, because Oregon ranks almost last in the country in all of like staffing, budgeting, and all the things. So we are literally every single day fighting to save our libraries, fighting status quo. Administrators will 100% make or break a library program. Like if you have an administrator that you have to work with and they don't believe in libraries or don't understand, you can't even do your job. So library leadership has been the most challenging for me, and I love it. And it's just literally every day 100% advocacy. So and then one of the last quotes that I live by as well is Maya Angelou. I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel. And so much of library leadership in K-12 public education, like my role amongst like the library aides that I support, it's relational, which can be really problematic sometimes too, because I'm in a position of influence, but not a position of power. So it gets kind of muddlesome and tricky sometimes, but
right.
Thanks for letting me go through my slides and
I
share.
appreciate it. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's great. I feel like you've illuminated. First of all, thank you for your service.
thank you.
Second of all, like I think you've illuminated to me some of the interesting things and intricacies around being in the library world. My sister-in-law is a librarian as well, and I've talked to her, but I think the one thing that she said that was similar was like it's just advocacy, like really trying to make sure that folks understand like, hey, libraries are cool and they're needed, and which I can only imagine how tiring that can be, how tiring that gets. So yeah, I'm definitely appreciative and thankful for the work that you do on a daily basis.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think for me, like I always kind of go back to I don't know, I take it back to the beginning, right? My first like semblance of leadership was in the classroom, right? Leading students. And I think I've learned a lot of lessons. The first one is that you have to relinquish the illusion of control. I think that there are guidelines you can set up, there are boundaries that you can set, there are conversations that you can have, and those are all really important. And in the end, people are going to do what they're going to do. And so trying to like balance those two truths together, for me has always kind of been how I've tried to kind of operate as a leader, right? Is like set people up to make the best choices possible and understand that you are going to have a bell curve of everyone doing different things. So starting with being in preschool, I think that was kind of the biggest lesson, right? So setting up an environment, for example, right? Where are you putting certain materials? Where are you putting your meeting space, right? If you have small groups, are you going to have this kid sit next to this kid because these two kids love to do this together, or these two kids aren't really getting along right now? Maybe we should give them some space from each other, or maybe we put these two kids together because they need to figure out how to work together, right? Like being a teacher, being an educator in a classroom like that really, really tests your leadership philosophy and your leadership, like I won't say abilities, but it does to an extent, right? Because you are constantly having conversations with other people about like and particularly in early childhood education, because our curriculums are so emergent that we have to check in with each other on a regular basis. We are observing, like observation is a huge part of our job, right? So we're watching, we're writing, we're commenting, we're checking in, we're tweaking the environment, we're, if something isn't being used or something isn't working, we have to switch it, right? So there's this constant iterative process that's happening. And I think what I've been able to extrapolate from that is like, that's how we learn and how we grow. We're constantly checking in. We're constantly seeing like what's working. We give it time and space to work. If it doesn't, don't be beholden to this thing so hardly, so bad that like you're willing to let the ship sink before you change it, right? And I think that's a big thing that I've tried to hang on to in my leadership. And so one of my first positions as a leader was as a teacher coach at Tiny Trees. So I was working with teachers in multiple locations in outdoor preschools around, the greater Seattle area. And each environment is so different, right? You had one park that was right by, really close to the ocean, right? And so the weather was different. The trees were different. There was just a bunch of different stuff that was going on. We had one park that was a sculpture park run by an art museum. So it was very meticulous. It was very like, we had to pack everything up anytime we left our space, right? So that presents its own set of challenges, right? One of the locations, some of them were just like in the middle of a hiking trail, right? So you had to be aware of any animals that would be around, right? Like I think at one point there was a cougar sighting, a few hundred feet from where the kids were. So, taking so much into consideration, and realizing that each place was so different, gave me the opportunity to see like, okay, these are new and inventive in different ways that we can make sure that everyone's safe, everyone's having a good time, and your classroom is as awesome as it could be, right? You spoke a little bit about that holistic approach, right? And when you're working with kids, young children outdoors, you have to take that holistic approach. It's not just, what am I doing in my classroom day to day, right? Like what curriculum am I using? And all that is very important because we are a school, right? But at the same time, you are in a public park, right? So you have to mitigate all of these factors that come with being in a public park. And that becomes part of your curriculum, right? The first few months is all about teaching kids how to not run off and teaching them what the physical boundaries of the class space are, right? And so taking all of that into consideration, I think was really good. And it caused me to be very Socratic in my approach. So I would ask a lot of questions to help folks get to the answers. I would share my knowledge and experience, but I would always want to leave with, what we call scaffolding, right? Like, how do you think this would work if you tried X, Y, and Z? And me not giving them the answer totally, but like sending them off in a direction is going to help them kind of like use that brainstorming and coming up with solutions that work best for their space. And then we can assess from there. As a like head of school, as a deputy ED, and that's kind of what my position was head of school. I was supervising our co-directors. I oversaw our monthly like professional development. So it was like listening to what the directors were saying about what teachers needed. It was, talking to teachers themselves and checking in, and then providing PD based on what they were looking for, right? So I think a lot of my philosophy is just listening and responding to those needs as much as possible. While also, I think the lesson that I learned is like, you have to set boundaries sometimes. And I think as a leader, that's a really hard thing to do because everyone wants to be liked and appreciated. And sometimes those boundaries make people very mad at you. And so I think one of the biggest lessons I learned, especially as my short stint as an executive director, is that sometimes the answer is no. and and like that's hard. People don't want to hear no. And they'll chalk it up to all kinds of other things and they'll be very upset. But when you have a broader perspective, you have to know how to set the boundary for what's best for the collective. There's one of my favorite quotes. At the end of it says, "You're not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it." And so it's to me, it's a reminder of, the things that we do aren't always easy, and it might always feel like a slog, but it's for the greater good of humanity, and it's for the greater good of society. And so, like, you may never see anything, you might not see it come to fruition, but that doesn't mean you get to quit either. And so that's something that has really sat with me. So I hope that gave some look into how I lead and how I want to continue to lead, and the lessons learned, and all of that. So
I appreciate you so much. I feel like we both have so much in common, and I love what
yeah.
you said about holistic leadership. I love how you ended the conversation, and like we both are doing our best to do what we can for humanity, which is really beautiful. And I also love what you said about boundaries and being the person to say no, and like that can be really challenging. And then I also think it's really cool that both of us have really like primary, like kinder through college level
Yeah.
teacher leader experience, because that
Right.
in and of itself is really special.
Yeah, I
Being
think
able
so
to
too.
work with the little kids is its own thing, right? Like
It is.
you
It
may
is.
be like teacher of the year, professor of the year, but plop a person in a kindergarten class and like, get ready, friends.
Yeah. It's hurting cats. I tell people that all the time. It is organized chaos. But
It's
there's
joyful, organized chaos. It's
so much
lovely.
beauty
And
and learning, and yeah, and if you can, I mean, that's if you can apply that, if we could just apply that to life.
yeah.
Life is organized chaos. If you could figure that out, if we could figure that out, then I think most of us would be a lot happier. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and end the recording and also end the Zoom. And thank you to any of our classmates who are listening. We're really looking forward to hearing from you all as well. So,
Yeah, for sure.
Khav, I'll talk to you in the near future. All right.
Yep. Take
Okay.
care.
Bye.
Bye.